Welcome to Comfortable Conversations. I'm your host, Jazz Kirk, where we dive into the idea that the greatest gift life can offer is discomfort. These honest yet comfortable conversations we will have are essential as your life is your canvas. In each episode, I will share practical wisdom and personal stories that guide you through life's biggest questions, encouraging growth, self-discovery, and deeper connections in your everyday life. On today's episode, we have Adrian Lopez. Let me begin by saying Adrian is my life coach, career coach. I really think I was introduced to him like it was a godsend because it was during a time within my own personal journey that I was exploring more corporate opportunities, also balancing honey-do, what my next chapter would look like. And voila, one, I had never worked with a life coach or career coach. I've had a business coach, but career coach was like a new journey situation. And Adrian is like a sparkle of like greatness that helps you see your greatness. When we think about this podcast coming to life this year, Adrian was the person who like helped heal me and to find my voice during like a breakup and like hard things at work or hard things in business. So today's comfortable conversation, we're going to get juicy. How you doing, Adrian?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Are you excited?
I'm so excited.
Yeah.
I'm so excited.
So I really want to ask you, like, what discomfort led you to, one, be right here, right now, but also, like, within your life? What has your journey been like? How did you come about to be a career coach? You're 20 plus years in the game. Like, why choose this?
Yeah, great question. So I started out wanting to be in tech, really. And so I started out in the federal government. You actually don't know this, I don't think, about me, but I was an intelligence officer.
Okay.
And I traveled around the world for about 10 years. Had a very high travel rate and just got really burnt out in that job. And so I ended up resigning from my position. I moved to Texas. And I just spent a year and a half volunteering. And so I volunteered at my church here in Texas. And that led me to a job where they hired me to run their audio video kind of department. And so I ended up leading, over about 7 or 8 years, I ended up leading about 5 departments, probably 35 to 50 people. And that was great. Like I had been meeting all my goals. Like I met like my income goals that I had wanted. Like I was doing great work, leading teams, being a manager, doing all the things that I had thought that I wanted to do, climbing kind of the ladder, right? The corporate ladder, if you will. And so during the time that I was working with the church, I started working with therapists first, and then she got me working with a coaching group. So there's 10 of us that meet once a month. And we basically learn how to coach and be coached in that group. And so I've been in that group for like 7, going on 8 years now. And that group has been so transformational in my life. Like they were with me when I decided to leave the church and start my own business. And so I started a consulting business first, doing audio video design and engineering work. And then they helped me when I was looking to get married. And so in a relational sense, it really helped me get over the hump of, some of the insecurities that I had about marriage and relationships that were rooted in some past things that happened to me. And so, yeah, through a lot of life changes over the past 7 or 8 years, they've been so instrumental. And so as I was doing my consulting firm, I was very dissatisfied. I wasn't getting the joy that I had. I was lots of discomfort.
Okay.
And I had lots of conversations with my wife about like, I'm doing what I thought that I really loved to do. And I've always wanted to own my own business, and I'm doing that.
Yeah.
But something about the work, I just wasn't connecting with me. And I was really good at what I was doing, and I was really successful at it.
So when you say something about the work, can you kind of break down like what you were actually feeling like within the disconnect, or was it like just the motivation? Like, what about it were you like, and what were you feeling within your body to be like, something's off?
Yeah, I joke with my wife that like I was a miserable person during that time. So there was this like I was really negative.
Yeah.
I think I noticed that, and that's not someone who I normally am. I would get super frustrated. I didn't feel like a joy in what I was doing. I didn't feel a purpose.
Yeah.
When I managed people, what I realized was like I loved affecting people in a positive way, seeing something in them, calling that out in them, helping them to see it for themselves, and seeing the potential in them, and helping them on their journey. That's what I
Okay.
did when I was a manager, and when I became a business owner. And I was just kind of doing engineering work behind a computer. And
Yeah.
yes, I was also project managing. So I'd like go to job sites and I would interact with people, but it was so different. And with my coaching group, I realized like I really wanted to like I had to get to the point where I realized that like I wanted to impact people positively. And although I was doing some really cool projects, like I worked on the American Museum of Natural History in New York. They have a new wing, and I was managing one of their technology projects. And it's really cool work, and it's for a good cause.
Yeah.
And like I didn't feel like I was really impacting the world in a way that like, I really wanted to. So I really had to come to grips with that for
So,
myself.
but you also, it sounds like early on, like when you hear people manager, like some people are like, I am not a people manager. No, never. I hate managing people. But you, that was what you really loved. Like when you had that first role, not first role, but the role you had of managing 20 to 30 something people,
Hmm.
like you were thriving because you were like sprinkling little, you were watering all of them, and then you get into this role, which entrepreneurship is just like go kill and eat all by yourself. Like,
Yeah,
good job. You got this. And
absolutely.
it is managing people, but it's from such a different lens that it becomes like, sometimes I feel like it's do or die, where you're looking at every choice like, okay, what is this one going to be? And you're like, relax.
Yeah.
Good things are happening here too. So when I think about that people manager, that felt purposeful. When you remove it, you remove that purpose feeling. And so then you get back to, the life coaches that you were starting to work with. So bring us through that like community.
Yeah.
Because I think that was like one of our first conversations you shared with me, like, Jazz, you are in a safe space. You have a really great community.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So I did much of my early career by myself. Like I didn't have a strong community.
Okay.
And it wasn't until I started my coaching group where I started to realize, oh wow, like this is really powerful. And my therapist had told me, she's like, you and I can do therapy one-on-one. And she's like, you'll make progress. She's like, but when you get into a community, then you'll actually have more exponential progress. What
Mm.
ends up happening is the interesting thing about community is that we're wounded in community. And so we tend to want to isolate from community.
Okay.
But when we're wounded in community, the only way to get healed is in community.
Ooh, okay. Now he gave us a
Yeah.
proverb. Let's unpack it. Okay. Trauma moment happening. Damn, Adrian. I'm just kidding. Wow. So, but you had to experience that for yourself, learn it, and now you teach it.
Correct. Yeah, I had to learn that for myself and realize that this is true. And I trusted my therapist to such a degree that I was like, okay, if you say that this is what I need, I couldn't see the forest from the trees. And she told me, she's like, you can't see the forest from the trees right now, but I'm telling you, this will be transformational for you.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, like I'm all in. And so it was really hard. It was really hard at first because I was not used to letting people in. And I had to practice being vulnerable. I had to practice being authentic, sharing my story, being fully known. I had so much fear of rejection when I started the journey. And it's so great. Like now, 7 years later, like being able to have a group of people who I meet with once a month, and we do kind of get together throughout the in-between times. But those moments where we can just kind of share all the things that have happened and be fully accepted, fully known, fully seen by a group of people is just so transformative and so powerful. And I wanted to share that like with others. And I share that with all my clients. Like whenever I hear them talking about, they're looking for their next career behind their computer and they're not interacting with people, I'm always like, okay, let's time out for a second. Like you need community, you need to be in community. Most jobs, 70% of jobs these days are found through some sort of personal connection, not through blindly applying online. And so it comes up in all sorts of different, conversations and arenas.
But what do you say to someone who, I think we knew I was embedded in community, but it was like personal things that were like that I needed to work on to even be transformative within the community space. But what are things you feel like people can actually do? Like, we are in a culture where, people have a lot of anxiety even just trying to connect and get past the screen. Like, how do you help people encourage them? Just like, I'll go sit at a bar and by myself and be like having a blast. But for a lot of people, that's not common, where it's like, I'm anxious to be out. There's social anxiety, just like societal pressure. So how do you help people with that? And how did you help yourself?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So people who have a lot of social anxiety, I usually recommend having community around an activity.
Okay.
So I usually will recommend like, hey, if you love pets, like, go to the animal shelter, volunteer, walk pets, go to the dog park. And in doing that, you will be interacting with people, right? And it kind of gets you more comfortable. So a lot of time for people who are more dismissively attached, which means we kind of like isolate or trying to kind of go more inward, it really is helpful to like have an activity or like a cause that you're working with other people. And in that you have kind of conversations and then you develop friendships through that. So that's usually my first recommendation, because it is really hard to jump right into a group like I did. For me, I was at such a place where I was so depleted and I was really desperate.
Yeah.
And I was like, I was willing to jump in the deep end, and a lot of folks who get to that place that have joined our group, it takes them maybe a year or so before they have felt comfortable to share. But I was just like, this is make it or break it for me. Like I knew I needed something. And I was just very distressed at the time. And so jumping into the community, being like, okay, like I trust my therapist, like I'm going to go all in on this and we'll see what happens. And so for me, it's easier with people that I don't know. Yeah. Because I'm like, I can go all in. And if I feel rejected by them, then I'm like, okay, whatever. I don't really know them.
Yeah.
It's harder when there's people that you do know and that you have relationships with, at least for me. Because like I value those friendships already, and then to feel like if I share something really vulnerable and feel rejected, like that is harder. It's a harder hump for me to get over. So this was a group of people that I had no idea that was put together. People from all walks of life, CEOs of companies, of large companies. There was housewives, women who just like work at home with the kids, and so it was fun to be in such a huge mix of people from all sorts of backgrounds and walks of life, and then to just hear their perspectives and to feel so connected, and how we kind of speak into each other's lives from their lens.
Yeah, we're all kind of dealing with the same things.
Yes.
In reality, like no one's exempt from the hurts, the traumas, the pains. Isolation is the question I want to go back to, because I think, and personally for me, I used to like isolate in order to rebuild yourself. And do you feel like a lot of people do disconnect in order to get to a place where they feel back comfortable, but that's where you build your strength, but you also may build your walls up at the same time? Like, how do you teeter the lines of like enjoying your alone time, but not building a wall to isolate?
Yeah, wow, that's so good. It is something that I've had to learn over the years for myself, because I do have a tendency to isolate. But sometimes solidarity is really good for us.
Okay.
Right. So I'd like to use solidarity different than isolation, because isolation tends to have more of a negative connotation. That's where we're building our walls, like we're not letting people into those places. But when we have some solidarity and we have some alone time, like that's really important for me as an introvert because I recharge and I process and I think during those times. And so, but when we are doing that at the exclusion of including other people, then that's where it starts to become more unhealthy.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And for that, it's different for everybody. Everyone has their line. Some people are more extroverted. And so they have a hard time going into solidarity, but that's also really important, right? You need to have a balance of both. So,
do you feel like some people lack the solidarity aspect of it?
yeah, I think it's a misunderstood. I think people isolate thinking that they're,
Solidarity.
yeah. And it really is like you need to be in community and you need to be able to be vulnerable with other humans. We were kind of made and designed to be relational. We're
Connected
relational
to
beings.
people,
Yeah. And so when we isolate too much, and it usually happens during times of like, stress or trauma, like we want to just retreat, right? Because that's kind of our flight or fight, mechanisms come into play, and we want to protect ourselves. And it's a normal human reaction. And we do need to protect ourselves to a degree, but we do need to have people in our lives. And not everybody is a safe person, right?
Yeah.
And but finding those safe people in your life where you can be vulnerable and then trusting them, but at the same time, relationships are imperfect, and it's kind of by design. Like we will get wounded in relationships, even with people who we feel really safe with, because we're all human and we might miss each other at times. But it's important not to let that cripple us, right? And hold on to those things and use it as excuses to isolate. We need to continue to be in relationship even when we're wounded. That's what helps us actually to grow
and
heal.
So I think I shared at the beginning, like one of our first conversations you shared, like, of course, me sharing what I was dealing with. You shared, like, Judge, you're in a safe space. You don't have to worry about that. But then also we began to, like, cultivate my voice and learn to communicate, or, like, even that trust building that was happening. Can you kind of speak to that? And if we want to use me as an example, let's put it out there. But like, can you kind of share a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think it reminds me of kind of a story that Brene Brown used one time in either a book or a talk that I heard her. And she talked about having like a jar of marbles. And so as humans, we don't just go all in, right? We typically we'll drop a marble in the jar and see what happens, right? And so we'll give a little piece of ourselves and see like what that person does with that. And then if we feel like that was received positively or we had a good experience, we'll give another little piece of ourselves. And so trust is built over time that way. And then there are times where trust is broken. And so then, sometimes those marbles are taken out of the jar. And so we have to find ways to rebuild that. And we get to choose, right? Whether we continue, if the relationship is important to us, where we continue to, address those things, have honest conversations about how something hurt you and see how they respond. And so trust is this constant like give and take of like sharing little pieces of ourselves and seeing if those pieces are honored, right? And so that's what I endeavor to do in all of my conversations with clients, is that I want to be fully present and I want to be a safe space for them to share anything that they need to share. And most people haven't experienced that before. And that's the crazy thing, is that most people have been wounded so deeply that they're really scared and of being, of sharing that with that level of vulnerability. And so my goal is always to create a safe space, to always approach everything with empathy and with kindness, right? Everyone has a different story and has different things going on in their lives. And so that's kind of what I like to do. And so I'm actually curious about you, like what your experience was, right, in that kind of dynamic.
So from the beginning, I did feel like it was a safe space, but like the energy, the conversations we had, like you always led me back to myself. And like even when we would just like start and it'd be like, okay, how are you doing? Like, all of a sudden I'd say the one thing that I was like, all right, this is what this hour is about to be about. Let's unpack that. Cause I think one time, which I was grateful to finally get to a place that like, when you think about your trauma and your triggers and like, and I want to share this from a space of like, though I was not in therapy, this felt very therapeutic and very healing. And there were things career-wise that had triggered me that I was now unpacking. And like one of the examples was who does she think she is? And that was like years ago from a corporate job that I worked. And like there was so much trauma there. And I'm thinking this woman who was my supervisor was someone I should admire. And you're like, she may not have been the nicest person. Like, that's not how your boss is supposed to treat you.
Right.
And so that was me unlearning, like, oh, if someone's hard on you and they're unkind, like, that's what it was. They were unkind. That doesn't mean pick yourself apart. Mm-hmm. So a lot of our conversations were like, okay, this really is a safe space. I was able to begin to recognize what safe spaces looks like, because I hadn't done that before. Like I had within myself, I knew what the safe space was. But like you said with the marbles, I was like, not today. We're not getting trust marble. You're not getting one. You're not getting one. You're not getting one. But I did start to like recognize people for who they are, and family and friends. It was just like, I can share with you and I feel so comfortable. But it also became like sharing with you and like, even having a previous therapist, like we talked about that. I was like, I'm here with you right now because my therapist triggered me. Like, I want to actually talk. And I was in a space where I was like, I didn't feel like I was being heard. And I think I shared with you as well. Like, I want to show up 100% Jazz. I no longer want to keep like corporate world 70%, honeydew. I'm giving 100% family. But I was like, whenever you see Jazz, I want to show up. And I think that was the work where it shifted from us just really focus on career. It became like, okay, in life, Jazz wants to show up. But then we had to have those really hard conversations and like a lot of tears as I'm like trying to explain to Adrian, like, okay, this is what I think I'm happening. But it was like joy and happiness coming out as well.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because there are, when you think about coaching versus therapy, this might be a good time to talk about that. So when you think about therapy, it really is about reflecting on the past and understanding how your past experiences and kind of emotional challenges are showing up today and affecting you today. And coaching is really future focused. It's really about looking at your goals and clarifying your goals, and then let's put in strategies to meet those goals. I think as a coach, at least for me, I'm always very aware of, okay, I'm trying to understand, if we're having trouble kind of making progress towards some goals that you say that you have for yourself, I want to understand kind of, what is the root of that. So there's a little bit of like overlapping gray area here, right? And so I try to be really sensitive. I'm not a therapist. And so my wife's a therapist and I have lots of therapist friends. And so I probably more awareness of like, where the boundaries are than probably most people do that are coaches. And so I try to be really specific and I try to make sure I stay in my lane, but also I have to evaluate, if you're getting stuck somewhere that's because of a past wound. So I want to try to understand that a little bit. And then when I start to get out of my lane, I'll be like, okay, I think now it's time you may want to, refer to a therapist or go see a therapist for this specific thing that might be keeping you from reaching your goals. Does that make sense? So there's just like this interplay between coaching and therapy that like, there just are things from our past that keep us stuck. And when we identify those things, we have to work on those things. And then we can revisit like the coaching and the future focus kind of strategies to kind of continue to move forward.
But I like that you said coaching is future focused, because I think sometimes people can look at therapy and want that future focus, but then it's like, that's not the space. And granted, it can be, you can have that relationship with your therapist, but and that's what attracted me to needing to work with you, because I was like, my therapist isn't understanding. Like, if you ever watched the show Billions, I was like, I need someone like that. Like, where is she? Like, does she exist? Because it's like, I want to talk through the current things that I'm dealing with, the current blockages I have, which then helps me realize, like, oh, I'm doing this because of a past thing, and this looks exactly like the thing before. There were so many conversations we had of like, this is a pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I want to stop the pattern. So, okay, we look in the rear view, we look in the, I like to say the attic, we clean it up, and then I'm like, okay, now we can move forward, which it really did help me ignite a light within myself to be like, oh, this makes sense now.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many times where if we can, we reflect back, we look in the rear view, and sometimes we can resolve some of those things on our own. We can see the unhealthy pattern, we can make changes, but then sometimes we just get really stuck, and we do need a therapist to help us work through that. And so that's where I'm always trying to balance, right, back and forth. And really, and this is an interesting part, and what I love what I do, because every client is different, right? And so we start talking about goals, but if we start to get stuck, or like with you, it was interesting because like I kind of sort of knew what you wanted, but I couldn't, every time you explained it, it was like a little bit unclear. And that's a clue to me. I'm like, okay, there's something here that there's a tension that you're struggling with. And we kept coming back to it over and over again. And I was like, Jazz probably thinks I'm asking the same thing that I don't remember what we talked about, but I'm like, I want you to get clarity for yourself, because it's not about me knowing, it's about like you discovering that for yourself.
But you never like gave me my answers.
No.
Like, you always led me to it, and it was like these aha, like, the other day I was thinking about this, and you're like, I've been leading you to that. Like, it's right there in front of you. So it really is helpful. I think I wonder, like, when you do have clients, like, I was willing to put in the work consistently. Like, we had a consistent, I think, every 2 weeks working together. Do you feel like some people look at a life coach or career coach and think that person is, like, supposed to do the work for them?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know that, like, I don't know that people think that we should do the work for them. Just some people aren't interested in doing the work. They say that they are.
Okay.
But you can tell, like, their heart's not in it. And I think those clients are harder to work with because
they like the idea of I'm changing my life and I want to do this and I want to advance in my career. But you're like, you got to put the work in.
But you have to put the work in, yeah. And that's what I really appreciated about you, is that you always showed up like ready to do the work. You're like, okay, we got to do this. I want to make progress. I want to go forward. And some people say that they want that, but when the rubber meets the road, they don't want to do the assessments and the worksheets. They don't want to have the hard conversations. And so at that point, we have to have honest conversations with them. And so if it's not the right time for the journey, it's okay. Like, I never shame people for that. It's always like, I have to kind of like gauge where they're at and help them, and sometimes people want to go slower or faster or whatever. And so I try to adjust. But then there's just some people that they will eventually drop out, is what ends up happening. It'll be like, this isn't for me.
But because I feel like in a lot of things in life, like, people don't recognize like the consistency, the dedication, the discipline it takes to prioritize something. Like, healing is an ing. It's a forever thing. It's a journey of unfoldment. And like, this season in my life, these specific things were what I had to work on. And next season, it may be something different and you evolve. But the undertone of that is like, being willing to put in the work, make the changes you want for the things that you say you want. And so I think my biggest question is like, how do you inspire people to see that? Like, it really is the incremental things. Like, I think you always were like, Jazz, you're doing great. And I'm like, okay, let me receive this, because it was hard for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, as you were talking, I was just thinking, my only Like if you can just stay curious with yourself, I think if you
Mm.
can be in a space where you can be curious, and you can just be open, then that is, I would say, 80, 90% of the battle, right? Is just being curious and being open. And so I'm always asking questions to try to inspire that curiosity in somebody. And then sometimes it'll like, people will get it. Like sometimes people will show up to the first session, they're like, I don't know. But like once we have that first conversation, I'm like, okay, like what was this like for you? And then as they reflect, and I think that's an important thing too, is like asking like, what was your takeaway from today? Like what was valuable today from our conversation? And getting people to stop and reflect, like, oh yeah, that was really helpful
Yeah,
to like
I
talk
took a
through
lot
these
of
things.
notes.
Yeah.
Like even as I was talking, I would always like take a lot of notes. Whatever you would say, I would like write down, but then like sit with that because that was the work like moving forward. Or like you would share journal prompts, and I would like really sit with the journal prompts. And this isn't like for me, work life balance is not a real thing. It's like they're all together as
Hmm.
one. And I think, do you feel like you work with some people who, like, when it comes to their career, they separate that from their personal life and they're like super focused just career?
For sure. Yeah. I think there's definitely people that compartmentalize it, or they have such a strong like sense of what they think that they want. And they're just like, well, I already know what I want. I don't need to talk about this. I don't need to clarify goals. And I'm just going after this. I'm like, okay, that's great. And I have clients who, like, I had a client a couple weeks ago. We were unpacking. Like, she said that she wanted to be a manager, and that's how she saw herself meeting her goals. I'm like, okay. So then I asked her, like, well, what are some of the projects that you're most proud of, or some of the things that you've worked on? And so in the course of the conversation, she kept saying how she didn't like the people kept getting in her way, and all this stuff. And so, like, at the end, I was like, so I hear you saying that you want to be a manager and you want to climb this corporate ladder. I said, but all the examples that you gave had nothing to do with people. They all had to do about like managing the projects and meeting the deadlines and stuff. And every time you talked about people, it was kind of like in a negative way.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I think that's something you probably need to think about. And she was like, oh my gosh, like I had never thought about that before. So I'm like, so sometimes we think we want something, but when we have someone to like
Bounce it
bounce
off
off of
of
and
and
ask
hear
questions.
ourselves
Yeah,
say,
and
yeah.
then I can sometimes make connections for people because again, you can't see the forest from the trees a lot of the times, and so having somebody that's like impartial, third party that you can bounce someone off of can help you validate whether it's really what you want or what you don't want.
Do you feel like you deal with a lot of people who money is their motivator? So then that becomes like why their goals are their goals, and maybe everything else is falling to the wayside?
That's an interesting question. I had expected that. I expected people to be very money driven, and there are people that are that way, but I find that's actually a really small percentage.
Okay.
A lot of people want to find some sort of value or purpose in what they're doing.
Okay.
Um, or a lot of people want to learn something. They want to feel like they want to continue to learn. So there's three motivating factors when you think about career. One is financial gain, one is learning, and then one is finding purpose, right, in what you're doing.
And those two.
And those two, interestingly, a lot of people these days, like that's what they're looking for because they're getting the money, they're having the jobs that are paying them well, but they're realizing that they're not fulfilled, which is kind of what my story was too, right?
Yeah.
So like I was getting paid really well, but like I felt like there's something missing here. And so I'm always trying to connect people with, even if they say that they're financially driven, it doesn't normally last very long. So I'm always trying to connect them, even if they don't think that they need that, trying to connect them with a purpose. Like, what are some of your hobbies? What are some of your things? Like, let's talk about what are these things that do fuel you? And let's try to connect that to business. And sometimes it's not necessarily you have to do some of the things that you feel most passionate about. And I always use passion and purpose very differently.
Okay.
Because sometimes passion projects are things that we shouldn't be doing to make money. But sometimes people are okay with that. Like as an example, like sometimes if someone loves to volunteer at their kid's school and in their sports teams, but then if you create a business around, making money off of it, then it sometimes feels like uncomfortable or it cheapens it. And but finding purpose in what you're doing just means, like, for me, it's like positively impacting people, right? And I can do that in a variety of different ways, but I have passion things that like I really enjoy doing and things that I volunteer in, but like I don't necessarily want to make a business out of those. So I always try to like separate that for people because I think that sometimes gets confused as well.
Yeah, I have things that I'm like, I just do for fun. I don't have to monetize it. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
everything doesn't have to be monetized just because you're good at it.
Right.
Like, you need to have room to play. And I think that goes back to the curiosity of yourself. But I also wonder, with the meaning and purpose kind of being one, and then learning and then financial gains, do you feel like when people really find the meaning and purpose, they automatically get 2 and 3, like the other two?
Generally, it really depends on the purpose, or it depends on the person, I should say. But yes, I think when those clients who are connected to their purpose, like, it makes the financials just kind of come, because if you think about it, you're doing something that you're in your flow, right? You enjoy what you're doing. You love to talk about it.
You're intentional. What you put out,
And then the kind of the financial piece sort of just kind of works itself out. You start to move towards your goals in that way, and it kind of works itself out.
Yeah, I feel like that was. I think I started with like I had some financial goals.
You did.
But then we realized it was more purpose. Like, I think I had financial and like growth. But I also was going through a healing time.
Yeah.
And then we ran the block back, like circled back, and it was like, it's really purpose. And then it like flowed, it all flowed, but it was like, for me, I felt like I had lost my voice. And I think we had a lot of conversations of like, in the career world, I was like, okay, where's your voice? Honeydew, I was like, okay, where's your voice? And then this igniting, like, I think that we had a call that I was like, I'm like on fire, like, I want to be on fire, and I like feel it within me. And it was like, and I was like, I don't want to put this out anymore. Like, she's back, baby. So yeah, it's interesting.
It was really cool to see your transformation, because it's so interesting how all these things are interrelated. We'd like to, like, you going back to what you said before, we like to compartmentalize these things, but they're just so related, right? And so part of you being stuck in your career progression was the need to find your voice, right? And being able to like show up in those spaces and say what you want, and say what, how you say what you need, And so a lot of it was like, okay, well, if you want to stay in commercial real estate and you want to do these things, then like, why aren't you applying for those jobs? And like, why aren't you having these conversations? And so like, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So.
And being able to, I think one of the things you shared was like, well, why do you feel you have to wait to get this in order to lead? Like, you can lead right now. And that was like something that I was like, in all these other areas, I do that. But in this area, I don't do it until I'm told or asked, but maybe I can lead. So yeah, that was really, really powerful. So how do you feel like you help people balance, like when it comes to career, being able to speak up for themselves, where it doesn't make them feel like very anxiety ridden, and like where they feel confident and comfortable? Because I think sometimes when you think about corporate America, or you're like 9 to 5, you feel like you are, I'm not going to use the right word. I feel like I'm not using the right word, but like it creates friction versus like, no, it's okay to speak up for yourself. It's okay to say like, hey, let me set these boundaries. Hey, I didn't like that, or I didn't like this. And like, put the emotion back in work. I think sometimes when you think of like HR and all of that, you're like, okay, I can't be emotional, but where's that emotional intelligence kind of balance into that?
Yeah. So I think when I think about it, um, sorry, I lost my train of thought. But when I think about my clients and I think about helping them in this area, I want to, like, so there's so many clients that come to me and they do want to go to that next step. They want to level up in their career, right? But as humans, sometimes, a lot of times, we minimize like our skills and like our gifts and all the things that make us who we are.
Yeah.
And so my job is to really help highlight those things for my clients and to say like, hey, like you may have not have led a department, but you've led some teams, you've done some of this stuff. And so what's disqualifying you from applying for these positions or kind of going to that next step, right?
Right.
And so I think interesting going back to like just my coaching group, I guess a lot of the work that they did for me is seeing them calling out in me what they saw and then being like, oh yeah, like that's true. Like I had forgotten about that, or like I minimized that to such a degree that like I didn't value it right about
Yeah.
myself. And so they called those things out of me. And that's what I endeavor to do with my clients is be like, hey, like let's call out like all the gifts, all the abilities, all the skills that you have, get yourself to see that about yourself, right? And to recognize it, build that confidence. And then so that you can be like, yeah, I can confidently apply for this job. Because so many times we're like, well, I want to be that manager. I want to lead that department. I want to lead that branch, but I don't feel like I have the skills.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. And let's talk about all the things that you've done in the past, and then I can help bridge that gap for you. I can see the things and call those things out in you, and that they're like, oh yeah, and that builds confidence.
Yeah. And I think that was something you helped me with. It was like, okay, what about this? And I'm like, I don't know. But it's everything really is transferable, and there's certain skills and gifts we have. Like I naturally connect with people, so it's like there is no issue in this lane or this lane for you to naturally connect with people. Keep doing that. Like
Right.
that's what you're really good at.
Yeah.
I think as you were kind of sharing that level up, I feel like we're in such a culture that everyone's like, level up. Level up is like trending. Everybody wants to make sure they're always leveling up. When does it become like you've created an unhealthy like leveling up where you're like always go, go, go versus like, okay, this is a strong step you're taking and you're going to be okay. And I think that was a question, something we talked about where I was like, I wasn't feeling confident in my steps forward. Like I was like, I was running at full speed before, but then when I slowed down, I was like, okay, and now how do I move forward and still have confidence, though I don't want my pace to be as intense. I do want to level up, but I want to be intentional with that I'm not, I had to unpack like the making of mistakes. Like how do you kind of help people recognize like getting off the hamster wheel of always next thing, next thing, next thing?
Yeah, so I talk about this in my introductory call with clients all the time because so many times, so when we think about our career trajectory, right, and it's a lot of times it's patterned after what we've seen other people doing.
Yeah.
And so most people are in corporate America, climbing a corporate ladder in some way, and so that's kind of like the direction that we all tend to want to go, and so we can get stuck in that rut, right?
Yeah.
And so I always tell clients, like, I'm like, look, my job is to really like, let's pause. Let's get off the hamster wheel for a second, right? Because sometimes we're like on the hamster wheel, we're going, we're just trying to make progress. And I'm like, let's talk about like why you even got into this job in the first place,
Yeah.
right? And so I'm always like, okay, let's take a step back. Maybe you are doing what you're supposed to be doing in this part of your calling, but let's have a conversation. Let's talk to me about like how you got there. And so many times people are like, yeah, I came out of college, I had to adult, I got the sales job, and so that's what I've been doing. And you create a specialty and you find that you're really good at it. And you also may find that you don't find that purpose in it.
Yeah.
And so that's where my conversations generally start. It's like, tell me how you got into this, and let's pause and like just reflect on what we're doing. And then like as we're talking, I can get a sense of like, oh yeah, like they were very intentional and that this is kind of what they see for themselves. Or most times it's like, well, I fell into this It's what was available at the time when I graduated. I have to pay bills. I needed a job. And so no one ever really stops to reflect on kind of their career.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what my hallmark for me is like, let's look at your whole career trajectory. And if you continue on this path, do you like what you see at the end of that? And if you don't, like, how do we pivot? Right.
Yeah.
And also what I like to do is to talk about, there's different pathways. There is a corporate pathway, right? There is a climbing that corporate ladder. But there's also other things, like on the other end of the spectrum is business ownership, and then there's everything in between, right? So I always talk to clients about all of it. Like, you say these are your goals. Do you see yourself meeting these through this pathway, if that's corporate America or whatever? And if the answer is no, like you don't see how you could ever meet that, then
we need to unpack
that and figure out, like, is there another pathway that maybe would be better to pursue, right? So.
Do you feel like people sometimes need to give themselves like time? Like everybody's in a rush and it's like, oh, you've been on this trajectory and like you can't go 100 miles a minute and then think you're not going to crash. Are you seeing common themes between your clients, or like common themes that like people are burnt out, or what do you feel like people are dealing with the most?
Yeah, there's so many layoffs right now, and I think in the stress, there's so much stress when you're laid off and you don't have a job and you're looking for that next job. And because there's layoffs across all industries and all types of positions, it means there's also a lot more demand for the positions that are available. So people are really stressed out about getting interviews and getting that next job. And when you're in that space, it's hard to be creative and really think about these conversations, because we just want to get that next job. It's almost like when we graduated, from whatever schooling we had, whether it's college or high school or whatever, and you start to adult, you just need to find that job so you can pay bills. And that's where the space that they're at right now, because there's so many layoffs across the job market right now. And so that's really the hardest hurdle, is to be like, it really is helpful to stop and to think about what you're doing. Because once we can get clarity on what it is that you really want for your life, then we can target either those positions, right? If you need that next job, or different opportunities that might be available from like maybe a business ownership standpoint. And so that's really the hardest thing right now, by far. But going to our previous conversation about the hardest clients are the ones that, like, they're on a mission. And they don't want to stop and think about kind of where they've come and if they're on the right track. They're just like, trying to get to the next thing.
Like, I did that when I thought about this call, and I'm ready now. You're like, okay, a little bit more time is needed.
Yeah.
But I don't think we talk enough about like that. Like, there are a lot of layoffs happening across industries. And that is impacting people's mental health, their well-being. It's impacting, just like rejection. I don't care if it's a relation. Like, getting job rejection emails is like, all right, I'll end my day. Like, I got one and that was enough for the day.
Yeah.
But like, how do you help people like have empathy, kind of come out of the desperation phase? Because I feel like when I used to apply for jobs, like, someone said to me, like, you got to make sure you're not desperate. And you're like, I'm not desperate, but I do need a job. Like, right. I do desperately need a job. So, like, how do you have that balance, but also, like, help people have empathy and passion and, like, just patience with themselves? But because it is hard. Like, your bills are piling up. You have a certain lifestyle you're living, or, like, whatever circumstances you're dealing with. How do you help people, like, stay future focused, but also like work on the right now?
Yeah, great question. So for me, as I'm working with a client, it kind of comes back to the community piece, honestly, because when you are getting those rejections and you're feeling really crappy and you are isolating,
it doesn't help.
It's not helpful. And so I have a friend of mine who she started with our coaching group this past year, and she's going through a divorce, and she has lots of hard things happening in her life. And she's like, I don't understand how this is going to help me. She's like, I have some practical needs, And like, I don't understand how this is going to help me. And I'm just like, I don't know how to explain. Like, there's no way to explain to somebody that like being in community and letting people support you and letting people speak into your life and encourage you, like it doesn't change your circumstances, but it changes something inside of you. It gives you hope. It gives you so that you
Yeah.
can go on and apply for the next job or, do the next thing, the next right thing. And so,
It waters you when you don't have
yes,
anything to water yourself. Like
exactly.
it's the environment. There's moisture in the soil, and like there's shade when you need the shade. There's the sunshine when you need the sunshine. Like I always say, we are transferable beings. Like your energy helps my energy, and someone negative, you'll feel it. You're like,
Yeah,
I feel completely drained.
exactly. Yeah. So it's letting yourself be seen, letting other people be like, oh, I've experienced that too. Like, I know what that feels like. I was there at a place in my life, but like, here's where I'm at now. And so it just gives people hope. And so I always encourage people again with community. So I try to do that for them. I try to help normalize it, because people don't, I'm like, well, there's lots of people that are, and I'm not trying to minimize, I'm just trying to like identify with where they're at. There's lots of people. I work with lots of clients that have been laid off or
Yeah.
whatever the circumstance is, and encourage them that like they're not alone. They're not alone in it. Like there's so many people that like are in a similar place. And there are some groups that they are like career groups where people who are looking for jobs, and they're free groups, and it's almost like a little coaching group where they get together and they talk about. And I had some actually a fellow coach of mine did one of these groups, and she said it was very transformative for her at a time where she had lost her job, and being with other people who had lost their job that are also applying for jobs and talking about that on a weekly basis and like what they're doing and what are the strategies.
Yeah.
She said it really helped her, even though her circumstances hadn't changed, but being with other people that like are experiencing the same things like is really helpful. It's really motivating, and you can get ideas and be inspired by like some of the things that they're doing. And then when you're getting filled up in that way, when you show up to an interview,
you don't have this.
You don't have that desperation.
Yeah.
You're filled. You've done enough self-care, either personal self-care or being in community with others, that you can show up in a much healthier way to that interview and present yourself in that way. So that's what I found is really helpful.
Love that, because I think people forget like help. It's okay to ask for help, and sometimes you don't know what help you need. You think it's in this one way, but like community really is like the heartbeat of so much. Like you can't get anywhere alone. You can get places alone, but if you want to do it alone, it won't be fun.
Yeah.
So I love that full circle moment does come back, even in this time that we're in. Like there are a lot of layoffs, and you're like, guys, stay within community. There are resources. So my final question, as we kind of end our episode, is what do you want to say to anyone, like if they're going through a hard time? Like what is the one thing you're like, do this for yourself and you'll be all right?
Yeah, I mean, maybe a broken record here, but getting into a community, right? Whether that is, or just sharing with somebody, right? Whether you're getting a coach to help you work through some stuff or help you clarify your goals, just having somebody else in your life that can speak into areas. Like, we're smart people and we can figure a lot of things out on our own, but having someone else that like knows us, sees us, understands us, and can call things out of us or can call us on some of our stuff.
Yeah.
Is really, really transformative. And we underestimate the value of that in so many ways. And so, yeah, as I have clients like that don't see the value in it because like they were like, well, what am I going to get tangibly out of this? It's like, it's hard because it's like there could be something tangible. There could be like a position or a business at the end of the road.
It's an inward work that's happening.
Yes, it's an inward work. It's like really like digging through the soil. I say that all the time. It's like the soil inside of you. Like we're tilling the soil, and then we're filtering it out, and we're watering it, and like planting seeds, and that is all really good work, helpful work that's keeping you moving forward to your goals. But it's really hard to do that on your own in isolation. Like it really does take
You
help.
can't be all the characters in your
Exactly.
story. Like you literally can't say all the lines. Well, Adrian, it has been a pleasure having you on. Where can people find you, connect with you, reach out, have you as their life/career coach? I'll give you guys I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me there. I also have a website, alopez@esourcecoach.com. You can find me there. And if you just want to schedule an intro call, you can do that there. My services don't cost anything for folks. And so, yeah, I'm always happy to connect and see if it makes sense to work together and how I can help you. So
it will make sense. Like, guys, it'll make sense. Trust me. So thank you, Adrian.
Thank you.